and welcome to a brand new episode of Women of Community Banking podcast. I've got Pam with us today. Hi, Pam. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Can't complain. Like Thursday afternoon, 5:17 p.m. So even if I want to complain, I cannot because this is a long week. But again, thank you for joining in today to talk about and share your journey. So thanks a lot about.
Of course, I'm glad to finally join you after so many years.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, glad to join me after what, Pam? After 2 years, we've been just talking about doing this podcast forever. But yeah, finally you could do that. So quick introduction who Pam is. I don't think Pam needs an introduction because she's a very popular face in fintech, but still I'll try to do half a justice on my introduction. She leads, she's joined Alloy Labs most recently and she leads platform at Alloy, coming with a more than a decade of experience, technical, very strong technical experience in community banking. Now Pam acts as a connective tissue between the lab, banks, and investments to scale innovation. Now, Pam, that's a lot of things I talked about. If you want to add something, please feel free.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little bit more color of what that all means. So I've recently joined Alloy Labs to lead platform, which in traditional venture sense is usually what happens post-investment, all the things that a portfolio company can use as a competitive advantage from their investors. So in this sense, at Alloy Labs, I'm touching quite a few different things. So I get to work between our member banks, our LP banks, our centers of excellence, our portfolio companies, and bringing them all together to really figure out how to better the community banking industry and just banking and fintech in general. So it's been a really fun week 3 of my new role here, and I'm just grateful and thankful to be in the middle of all this.
Just hot off the press, right? That's what you are right now at our labs. And I mean, I like the organization, what our labs has been doing for community banking since the last few years. It's amazing. And again, to Alloy Labs, you guys are very lucky to have my sister join you guys. So congratulations on that. First question, maybe let's start with the journey, Pam. Right? Let's talk about your journey. How has this been so far? You spent considerable years in banking, and then you moved on to the venture space, right? So if you talk about your journey and talk about that more.
Yeah, it's a very interesting kind of accidental journey. I was in college studying computer science. I thought I was going to go move to Silicon Valley and become a programmer like we all did back in the early 2010s or early or late 2010s and early 2000s. Didn't quite work out that way. I actually ended up getting a random request from a local community bank that they had seen my resume online and their CIO wanted to interview me. And I was like, I have no resume online, so I'm not really sure what we're talking about here. But I was like, I'm a senior in college. Like, I would love to get more work experience. I was working for the state of California at the time in their cybersecurity for the franchise tax board. And I was like, well, this seems interesting and different. Like, let's see what it might look like. And I ended up joining the bank, ended up staying there a very, very, very long time. Wasn't really a highly technical thing that we were doing. I mean, there was no programming going on per se. But I ended up staying there for a while. I really ended up becoming very passionate, being able to help the local community. It was a bank that my parents had banked at, so it wasn't my first time ever going there. But eventually decided that this was really not for me. And then COVID happened, and I was like, there are unlimited opportunities. What can I go do? Ended up accidentally stumbling upon Bank-Tech Ventures and Carrie Ransom, the managing director, who are, of course, still dear friends of mine, all are. And we ended up talking, and they had a new fund that they were fundraising for, which is Bank-Tech Ventures. And they were like, hey, this is what we're looking to do. We're looking for somebody who's passionate about banking and technology and how to work that all together. And I was like, maybe, like, I know nothing about venture, but I'm happy to join and figure that all out with you guys. And I ended up joining as head of bank technology there and really helping build out what was then also their platform, and working with our 20 plus portfolio companies that we had there for about 3.5 years. And then most recently, I've been able to join Jason Henricks and the whole group at Alloy Labs and really be able to do things beyond just the fintechs that we've invested in through the Alchemist Fund, but also going to help lead things like our concept lab, really helping banks figure out how to actually work with early stage companies. And then, of course, helping the early stage companies figure out how to work with the banks as well. So it's been an interesting journey, kind of accidentally stumbling through things. I get questions a lot of like, how did you break into venture? Or like, how did you do XYZ? And I'm like, I don't know, it's just accidental. I'm just kind of going with the flow. It's definitely not what I had in mind as career paths as a child. Like, I wanted to be a journalist, and my parents were like, no way. I wanted to be a nurse. I actually started off school in college as a sports med major, thinking I was going to go be a physical therapist. And then I got very squeamish seeing people in pain. So I realized that was not for me. Let my brother handle all of that. So again, like life just feels like it's been very accidental. So at some point I'm going to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. But for now, I'm happy with where I am.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, no one as a kid wants to become a VC, for sure, because that's all accidental. I agree. And I'm very happy for you. Congratulations on your new move, Pam. So I hope it works out great for you.
Thanks.
So since you have a fairly, what do I say, unconventional journey, right? Working with banks and technology, then moving to the venture space. So what inspired your shift from traditional banking to leading like innovation and ventures right now at Alloy Labs?
Yeah, well, I will say in my current role, I still get to work very, very closely with banks in a very similar manner. Like we're very strategically aligned with the banks that are working with us. That's really, I think, the ultimate goal of Alloy Labs is to help banking survive and become better and helping all bankers figure out how to work with technology companies and how that's going to enable them to grow and scale their banks and continue to do that through this digital age. But I think really what prompted the shift is I wanted to do something new and different. I was like I said, when I ended up at Bank-Tech, it was very much like I have nothing. I have like no knowledge about this industry right now. And I'm very much I'm going to dive in and learn every single thing about something. And then I get to a point where like, okay, what's the next thing? I mean, it's definitely my ADHD. I get hyper focused. It was like, I need to learn this whole new thing. And it was very exciting and new. And I think I like found who I am through all of this. A dear friend of mine says I'm an Enneagram 2 Wing 3, which is the hostess. Those who know me know that I love bringing people together, and I've really gotten to do that in my last few roles, just bringing the ecosystem and community together, whether it's bringing friends together or bringing together banks and fintechs and operators and so all together to figure out how we can all be better together. Like, I really don't think this industry has to be as competitive as it's been historically. I think we all have a lot to learn from each other. And I think the only way to really keep moving through that is through supporting each other. I mean, like, that's how we became friends, is like, hey, we're all working on the same shared goal. Let's share notes. And I think I've really been able to lean into that the last few years, versus I didn't really get that satisfaction from the banking side alone.
Yeah, I think that's the intention, motivation, whatever you say for community banking. That never in my, I mean, I came from the Fortune 500s of the world to community banking. I've never seen community banks or credit unions being so open towards sharing what they're doing, because we believe this is a movement, right? It's better that another community bank or credit union welcomes a new customer or member than it going to someone else on the bigger side. So that's the reason, I think, because of the common joint mission that we have, community banks are always sexy and they will remain sexy, for lack of a better word, right? Obviously, community banks operate very differently than the larger banks or fintechs. So there are misconceptions that arise, right? Obviously, across the spectrum. My question would be around, what would be the biggest misconception you see when banks approach fintech partnership? Because it was not such a important thing, or not important, not of such a huge focus for banks a decade back. But now that they've they've understood, right, that we can go to Chime and open our checking account in like less than 2 minutes. Revolut is coming, Nubank is coming. Then you've got the other top bank. Do not do fintech partnership. I don't think you can even keep the bulbs running. So people have misconceptions, but what is your 2 cents on what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that a bank has while approaching fintech partnership?
Yeah, I actually think there's a few depending on just the, I guess, understanding of the bank. So I will say on this one side of the spectrum, the big misconception is that's not going to affect us. That doesn't affect our customers. Our customers don't need these things. They're all totally happy with the bare minimum that we're able to provide them at our bank. I think that's this side of the spectrum misconception. And I think, moving a little bit beyond that, we have, fintechs are hard to work with. Our regulators are never going to let us do XYZ. I think, again, those things, I think we've seen historically banks are doing pretty well with partnerships and being able to bring on, partners, vendors, whatever you want to call it, and helping grow deposits or helping increase, their ability to lend. So I think those types of misconceptions are just kind of on this side of like, that doesn't affect us. We can't do it. I also think there is a misconception that I'm trying to help alleviate, which is that fintechs don't understand how banks work. Yes, this is true at times, but I really feel like, organizations such as Alloy Labs, our fund, other funds that are all working in the same space of helping banks, our portfolio companies and the companies that we bring in and work with. Biggest thing that we're trying to do is teach them how to work with banks and how banks function and how banks operate and how to talk to banks, what matters in the banking world and why they should build towards that. So I think those are some of the misconceptions and a little bit of how we're trying to bridge that gap as well.
Yeah, that's reality, right? That's reality we're talking about. Now, since you've been on both the sides, you've been with a community bank for a few years and now on the venture side. So you would very well know the cultural and structural barriers or problems that do prevent banks from innovating. Right? I'm not naming them. If I start naming them, it'll be a page lock. But let me ask you, what do you think are the cultural or structural barriers that actually prevent financial institutions from truly innovating?
Yeah, I think one, the things that I just said about the misconceptions that banks have around fintech. I think some of the other barriers that are preventing banks from innovating are just lack of understanding on some of this technology, especially as we're moving into like AI and agentic AI and, RPA, which is a little bit, a few years ago, but there's still misconceptions about how this all works. Stablecoin and all these new things just keep popping up at us. And even I'm like, yeah, I'm in the middle of all this and I'm like, I can't absorb all this information and actually understand what all these things mean. So I think, banks not having a lot of that tech talent that can then go out and source and figure out and learn and then bring that back to the bank and their boards as well. Like, here's how this all works. And this is why it matters to us. And this is why we should do XYZ. That's a big gap that a lot of banks are not able to fill. And I think that prevents a lot of banks from doing things. I think secondarily, again, back to my like, oh, it's not going to impact us. This doesn't matter. Our customers don't care. That I think I've seen just broad financial services issue. Doesn't really matter what size your bank is. I think a lot of people will think like, oh, like a $500 million or $200 million bank is going to think that way. But I've seen $20 billion banks or financial institutions feel the same way, especially this validation of like, we've gotten this far with what we've been doing. Why should we do anything different? But I think, the next generation of executives and the next generation of board members will understand that that is not reality, but it's very much like we've always done it this way, so why do anything different? We've always made millions of dollars this way, so why try to change that now, especially for older demographics in bank leadership where it's like we're a few years out from retirement, like this is how it's going to be and this is what we're going to do, and then we're going to it's the next person's problem. So yeah, a lot of these things make it really hard for the fintech side as well, because while we're trying to sell into these institutions where we're like, we clearly see you have this issue, this exact thing will help you with this issue, but it's like, yeah, we don't really care. So it's a lot of that.
Yep. Historically, women in C-levels of community banks. Now add to that another layer, technology, right? That's like unicorn. You don't get women in technology and community bank and C-levels. I mean, it's very rare to find. So since this podcast is about celebrating women leaders of community banking, so I would want to ask a question that how do you think more women leaders can influence the next wave of innovation and collaboration when possibly you're the only one in the room, right? Who's having a point to say?
Yes, and I have been the only one in the room many a times, and it is not foreign to me, and it has definitely dawned on me many times when I've looked around and I'm like, oh, I'm the only woman, or I'm the only, woman of color, or whatever, what have you. I really think it's about bringing other people into the room, introducing, hey, I have this friend, or I know this person who's really good at doing this. Let's bring them in and let's get their opinion. I think oftentimes we gravitate towards people that have the same opinions as us, and they're going to agree with every crazy idea we have. But I think bringing in that different perspective, whether it's a fresh college grad or, someone that moved here from a different country or what have you, just all these different backgrounds, I think, come together and bring different experiences and really help show us like, hey, we haven't thought of it this way. And this was this person's life experience. And that's given them this perspective, and maybe that's the perspective of our customers, or maybe that's the perspective of other board members, and we haven't really thought of it that way. So let's incorporate that into what we're building, or what our strategy is going to be, or how we want to hire, or how we want to do anything. Just bringing in that different perspective, and being able to show like, hey, just because this person's not super experienced in this thing, or because they're this isn't their background, doesn't mean that they don't have great ideas and experience to bring to the table. That's been really important to me. I try to keep my circle very big and get everybody's opinions, whether I agree with them or not. I think it's always good for me to then reflect on like, hey, why do I have a very strong opinion on this thing? Whether it's personal, professional, technology, whatever, why do I have such a strong opinion on this thing? And this person has their strong opinion. So like, where could we meet in the middle? And who, both of us might be wrong, but how can we meet in the middle and figure out like, how does it all work together? I think that's really my advice to all people, not just women, but like learn what your neighbor's perspective is, learn what, the person that you've never talked to's perspective is on something, and it might help you innovate better, and it might give you better ideas or help you figure out some problem that you haven't been able to get through because they might have done it before.
Yeah, collaboration is the key. Otherwise, inventing in this ecosystem that's been running for hundreds of years, it's really difficult, right? And you have to give some credit to consortium like Alloy Labs, who've been doing it for some time now, right? At least helping push the community banking agenda and motive ahead. So let's focus on Alloy Labs a bit. I mean, I love what Jason is doing. How can consortium models like Alloy Labs help community financial institutions unlock the power of shared resources? Because that was the intention of Alloy Labs, right? Making resources that are available very easily and making it more fungible to a group of banks who might afford it by their own, right? But when you're a group, you can. So how do you think Alloy Labs come into the picture and it works out?
Yeah, and I'll remind anybody that's listening that this is my third week, so if I say something wrong, I'm sorry, Jason. So I have been able to experience so many of these interactions already just in week 3, and we all know last week was Money 2020, so I'll just call it week 2. I've really been able to see this from a different perspective that I maybe not have thought of before. In the banking world, I was part of groups that collaborated on things together, and it was usually like the same 2 or 3 people talking, and me being one of them because I can't not talk, because especially in awkward silences. So it wasn't a very collaborative environment, and I always felt like, hey, we have all these people that all do this exact same thing, and are all working again towards these same goals and, have very similar processes, but none of us are working together to actually figure out, how maybe you're doing something better than me in some way, and I need to incorporate that into my bank. But having been able to see some of that in Ally Lab so far, it's been just so fascinating about how, some of the banks that are our members are willing to share, willing to share what they're doing, willing to share what they need to learn, willing to share what hasn't worked, and really just been able to give the Ally Labs team such raw and candid feedback as well of like, yeah, like we are never going to do this, or like, yes, like we're going to be the first person to raise our hand and work on this together. But I really think having this consortium model, banks are able to rely on each other. We are not a bank, so we're not always going to know every single thing about how somebody that is not a bank's experience is like. So being able to hold these, opportunities for people to connect and really learn from each other, where we might be guiding them through something, whether it's, hey, here's the hot topic in the news right now, relating to the economy or whatever. Or it could be, hey, here's something that we think might be a thing 5 years from now. Like, what do you guys, as some of our most innovative banks, think about that? And how do you think that the banking ecosystem should approach this? Like a whole like build, buy, partner type situation. How is that all going to work together at the end of the day? So I think being able to have a peer that you can bounce ideas off of and have it in a setting where we all know this is our shared goal. Like it's not, we're not meeting in the hallway at a conference. We know we're all here to work on this very particular topic and subject together. I think has really opened up a lot of people to be able to share and collaborate very well together.
Makes sense. Talk about balance, right? So obviously we as financial institutions, we need to follow guardrails of regulatory constraints or fiduciary constraints, for lack of better words. So how do you balance the spirit of experimentation with regulatory constraints? Because I'm a blue sky guy, right? I mean, I think about, actual experimentations, but then again, at times what stops me is regulations. Can I even do that? You've been, as far as I know you, Pam, for the last few years, you're exactly the same. You're a blue, you believe in blue sky. You're like, let's experiment. But how do you balance? I mean, I have my own ways, but how do you balance?
Yeah, I think because I still have my banker hat on and I'm like, oh no, the FDIC is gonna not be happy about this one. Those who know me know that I'm a big regulatory nerd, so I try to keep very up to date on what is all going on the Hill and what future regulation might look like, what current regulation is looking like, and how that's all being played out in the banking world. But I really think, this is my advice to all banks and fintechs too. It's a lot about, one, you have to understand what the regulation is around what you're trying to do, but then two, taking baby steps to really get there to the point where, hey, I feel comfortable with step one. It's within the constraints of whatever regulation or whatever guardrail that I have around this. And it's worked out great as this pilot for this small group of, either my internal employees or, a department. How do we then go to the next step and the next step and the next step? I think it's a very, very bad idea to buy some piece of software or perhaps some sort of partnership and then just roll it out, bank wide and then pray that all works out well. So I think it's really about the baby steps. And then I think just being a little bit more open to just because something is new and different doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be something that a regulator is not going to love. I'm pretty sure if I was a regulator and a bank called me up and said, hey, you did our exam, we're wanting to do this, what's your thought on it? I think the ability to then have that like two-way communication with examiners, regulators, what have you, and be able to kind of work on here's what the solution's going to be, here's what we want to do, how do we do this in like a safe and secure manner. Safety and soundness is my favorite term. How do we do this in a manner that's going to be good for all, but also keep moving the industry forward? I also think right now we're starting to see what I expect will be some sort of loosening on some regulatory things, especially around community banking and innovation. So I think really leaning into that and understanding what that all means is top of mind for all of us right now in this industry, and I'm sure you as well. I also think, just being able to be parts of groups like this and say, how did you do it? And, we have the same examiner, or the OCC came in, what they say when you did X, Y, Z. And then also being able to like point at other banks of like, hey, 5 other banks are doing this. We're not the only one, so we think it's okay because X, Y, Z. I know, around AI, there's still a big question mark of like, how are examiners and regulators going to look at AI? But I think being able to understand how some of this technology is working in-house for you, and really having in-depth knowledge about how it actually works and what systems and customers and et cetera it actually impacts, and then being able to articulate that clearly and properly to regulators, I think is another big key to that.
So I have one parting question, right? Like, I know you don't have a crystal ball, no, neither do I have one. But still, like maybe 3 or 4 years from now, what will you, what will be the most what will the most successful community banks do differently versus the ones who do not do that differently? What would that be?
Yeah, that's a hot question.
Difficult question. Let's talk about difficult questions.
Yeah, it's a hard one. That's a good question. I think what I would personally say, and what I think all banks should be doing right now, is having clean data and then knowing what to do with that data, and then really figuring out how they should use that data to then either acquire new customers or cross-sell to existing customers or make experiences better for existing or new customers. I think just going along and guessing and saying, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and there's really no database decision driving that, I think is going to be the death of a lot of financial services. Again, this is the way we've always done it. This is, we do this one big community event, and that's good enough for our marketing, So I think banks and credit unions and FIs that are leaning into database decisions and really understanding what that data means beyond just like, oh, here's a report, we've looked at it, we've checked it off, and it goes on to the next thing, but actually doing something about it, whether it's, data that you don't want to see and it's making you not feel great, and then making a decision off that, or saying, hey, like, we poured all this money into this thing and it's going great, let's figure out why, and let's try to recreate that in some fashion or another. So yeah, I think data is my answer.
That means I'll have put on my plate for the next decade at least, because that's what I do for a living. So Pam, thank you for taking your time out to do this with us today. I really appreciate, and thank you.
Thank you.